Welcome to Wealth Unfiltered, your go-to source for industry insights and wealth creation. Stay ahead of the curve with a thorough breakdown of market trends, financial developments, and the impact of current events on your wealth building strategy. We deliver the latest updates and essential insights into the financial world through expert interviews and detailed analysis. Hey everybody, welcome to Wealth Unfiltered. Today we have a very special guest for you. So as you all know, we do financial everything. So one of the things that we do on this show is we like to bring on special guests to give you all the tricks and strategies to help better your wealth building journey. So today we have someone on the show who I think before anything else, I should say, if you're at the gym, you might want to listen to this later. I don't know where you are, but you'll want a pen and paper. I never tell you to do this, but she is going to give you so many insights. You're going to want to write them down. We have Devon Gimbel here. So she, actually, I'll let you go into your background, but I don't think I'll do it justice. But all I can say is I'm probably the most excited person for this show. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation. I've told you this before. This is my absolute favorite thing to talk about. So anyone who's going to give me an excuse to talk about the topic we're going to touch on today, I am more than happy to join in on the conversation. So thank you for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're talking about your business, but it didn't start as a business. So what I'd like is for you to kind of dive into what made you love using credit card points and really, bettering your life. And then how did you decide to start teaching other people?
Yeah, of course. So this is, I think a very unexpected, non-traditional, unexpected for me path. So my background is in medicine. I was one of those kids who grew up only ever wanting to be a doctor. That was like the singular focus. I remember stressing about grades when I was in fifth grade and grades didn't even matter. I remember getting like a B plus on a history test and being like, oh, my medical career is going to get ruined. So I was one of those delightful, very high strung children. And like I said, only ever wanted to be a doctor, went through undergrad, preparing myself for that. I took some time off in between undergrad and medical school actually to travel. And I ended up kind of being like a 20-something nomad wandering around Southeast Asia. And I took on a research project just as an excuse to go live in South America for a couple months. So travel has always been something that I have absolutely loved, that I've tried to make possible in my life however I could. And when I was very young, that was challenging because I did not come from a family with a lot of financial resources. So I really had to, be creative about how was I going to make travel possible when financially, it's quite expensive, even, 20, 30 years ago. So, I went through the traditional medical path, went to medical school, did a residency, did a fellowship, and finished all of my medical training in around 2012 and got my first grown-up job and really thought, this is it, right? You go through all of the school, you finally get to sort of what felt like the end point for so long. And one of the things that happened to me pretty much immediately when I got my first grown-up job, there's a very big shift that happens for a lot of medical professionals where in medical school, you get paid nothing. You are paying tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for your education or your student loans. This was my case. When you're in training, you're essentially getting paid minimum wage or less than. If you look at the number of hours that medical trainees put in versus what we're paid, and I trained in Boston, which is not the lowest, cost of living city ever. And so, when you finally get out of training, you get your first paycheck. For a lot of us, that is really the first time that we've gotten paid in our adult lives. I was in my early 30s at that point, and I had this moment of, on the one hand, thank goodness, finally I'm getting paid more, the minimum wage, working the hours that I'm working with all this education. But it was also terrifying because I was not raised with any financial education whatsoever. And I was kind of faced with this challenge of, oh my gosh, what do I do now? How do I responsibly manage money? How do I pay off multiple six figures of student loans? How do I grown up in a financial sense? I'd never been taught that. And so the way that I actually found this now love of my life using credit card points for travel is because I had to learn just all that basic financial education myself in my early 30s. And so I just dove into, financial blogs at that time. Again, this was a number of years ago now. Blogs were a really big thing. There was no TikTok, there was no Instagram, so I just went to the internet, to Google and blogs, and was trying to learn everything I could about just basic financial education, basic fiscal responsibility. And as happens on the internet, one thing leads to another. And I would find financial blogs, and then there would oftentimes just be a link or a story or a reference to something about credit cards, something about travel. And it really piqued my interest because I mentioned I have always loved travel. I love a deal as much as anybody else, and even though I was finally making money, I didn't feel like I could use a lot of my disposable income on travel. I had to pay off student loans. I was trying to save for retirement. I had
Right.
such a late start compared to a lot of my peers, all of these things. And also, I had been taught growing up that credit cards were horrible, that they were dangerous, that if you had them, you were going to get into a lot of financial trouble with them. And I can understand that education. I was raised by a single mother. She was not financially resourced. She had gotten into a lot of financial trouble, using credit cards, just trying, to make ends meet, trying to survive. So I can understand why her telling me these things about credit cards was meant to be helpful. But what it really did was just terrify me up until my
Feel like
30s.
that is so normal for people like in our
Yeah.
group because I was the same way. They're like, debt is bad. Debt is bad.
Yes.
And of course, like too much, but like utilize
Yes.
not as debt and almost as cash is like
Right.
strategy no one tells you.
Right. And even just, credit cards, I think about any of these things, credit cards, money, retirement accounts, all these things, they are just tools. They're not inherently amazing or terrible. I don't think they mean anything about you or, I don't think there's any morality, honestly, attached to money itself or credit cards themselves. But so much of us were taught, there's just very loaded things about money and about just financial tools. And that really affected me for a long time. And so, when I was first learning about this, it was this very big conflict. So I was like, wait a minute, I love travel. I'm reading what people are saying is possible to do with credit card points, especially if you're doing it, really deliberately, strategically. You can do this in a way that's very financially responsible. And all of that made sense to my logic brain. But then I had, all of this kind of history and lessons from growing up about no, no, no. Credit cards are terrible. They're dangerous. You can't trust yourself with them. You can't
Yeah.
trust the people who are offering them to you. You don't really know what they want out of you. I mean, all of these things, right? And so ultimately, my love of travel and my interest in like, could this truly be real? Won out. And so I started very, very slow, but I started, dipping my toes in this world of what does it look like to get credit cards, use them again in a very strategic and deliberate way in order to then either offset the cost of travel or what it has done for me now that I've been doing it for about, 10, 11, 12 years is how can I take whatever my travel budget is this year? Because many of us do allocate a certain amount of our budgets to travel and we're thrilled to spend our money on it. But how can I take points and exponentially expand my travel budget? And that's where I am now in this experience. And so, just in terms of, okay, how do you go from, again, only ever wanting to be a doctor, going through all of this training, education? I practiced medicine very full time, very traditionally for a number of years. And then ultimately in 2019, nothing having to do with the business I have now, I stepped away from the medical practice that I was in. And very coincidentally, in August of 2019, I decided not to be in that practice anymore. 2020
Wow.
comes along, which was kind of,
Yeah.
a surprise for many of us about what 2020 had in store. And I have two children and they were quite young at the time. They were 4 and 1 when the pandemic hit. And I basically became unexpectedly, stay-at-home parent when everything was shut down. No schools. We'd had a nanny who had worked for our family for many years, who was incredible, who was no longer with us during the pandemic. And so when we finally came out of that, and I feel like, 2021, when things kind of started to normalize, my kids kind of got back into school, I was looking around and just kind of thinking, what do I want to do for myself? Intellectually, professionally. I'm not someone who I think I'm very used to being intellectually stimulated and challenged. And I felt like I had kind of been missing that when I wasn't practicing medicine full time anymore. And at the same time, I felt like I'm good at two things and that's it. Like I'm good at practicing medicine and I'm good at credit card points and travel. Those are the only things, that I have a lot of experience in and that I'm really confident about. And I had been doing the credit card points just for my own personal and family travel, by 2021 for probably about 8 years at that point. And I'd never ever thought about building it into a business. I really didn't
Question
think that
about
was
that.
going to be
Out of those
possible.
eight
Yeah.
years that you're talking
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
how many of those years did it take you to feel like you went from like I'm just dabbling to like I
Yeah.
really
Oh, I think that is such a great question. I think I was a very slow learner, honestly. And I think it was because, again, I had so much just fear and worry about how can I do this in a way that's not going to be, quote, bad? That's not going to get me personally, into financial trouble. I want to make sure that I'm not just diving in so deep that I'm just making decisions that don't really make sense for my overall financial picture. So I think I actually had a very slow ramp up, which is fascinating because now when I teach people, I have folks who go literally from like 0 to 1,000 in 3 months. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it took me years, to get to that point. But I would say it took me, I don't maybe 6 months to feel like I just understood the basics, like the foundation of how does this whole system work? What are the opportunities? And then I just slowly built skills from there. And I think when I was first learning about this, the way that I traveled looks very different than the way I travel now. So back
Okay.
then, I learned about this, around 2012, 2013. I did not yet have children. So my oldest is now 9. I had him in 2015. So when I first started learning this, my solo was mostly solo travel, either for my own kind of vacation, leisure travel, or I would travel a lot for medical conferences. Like if I was trying to travel internationally, to attend a medical conference. And I would also travel sometimes with my husband. It's very fascinating. I would be an expat nomad if I could. When I grew up, my husband is very, very home based. So it's like he'll travel because I ask him to, not because he has this inherent,
Yeah.
need to go out in the world like I do. So I do a lot of solo travel and we would do some travel together at that point. And so I actually didn't really care about learning about things that I care about now in terms of travel, like how do I find a really comfortable, well-located hotel that's going to fit my family and we're not all going to go crazy because there's four of us in a 200 square foot room. Like that was irrelevant to me in 2012, 2013. What I wanted to do in the beginning, which I think is kind of the big alluring kind of part of credit card travel, is people were posting about how you can take what is not actually a ton of credit card points and use it to book crazy things that I never imagined I would have in my life, like flying international business class. The thought of flying any kind of flight, not in the most basic of basic economies, would never have occurred to me in my entire life. It was just not part of my worldview, it was not part of my experience. And also, I have flown so many places in the most basic a basic economy, and it's not comfortable. Like
Right.
I
Yeah.
have flown, from when I was in residency, I flew from Boston to Vietnam twice in like a 4 day period. And I could do that in my 20s. I could fly super basic economy, horrible itineraries, 45 hours to get from the
Yes.
States to India because, like that was the cheapest flight. That's how I flew for a long time. And that was great because it enabled me to really see the world. And also, I would not say that's the dream. I don't think a lot of us dream about how can I spend 30 hours, on an international flight in economy. And the fact that credit card points, people were saying, no, you can use, again, not that many points, and you can book yourself business class to Paris or first class, to Tokyo. I just thought, if what these people are saying is anywhere near the truth, this is life changing. And I just started there. What does it look like to try to get one really amazing flight for myself when I'm, going to a conference or going on a trip by myself? And it worked. And I think the fact that it worked, that's when I really hit the ground running. So I had a very slow ramp up period because I was very cautious. I wanted to take it slow. I didn't want to dive in and get in over my head. But from the time I started really learning about it, and I'm an information gatherer too, like I'm happy to learn about things for 2 years before I actually do anything about them. So, I learned about it for a year or two. And I still remember the very first flight that I booked using points. After that, I remember thinking, to the best of my ability, I never want to fly an international long haul flight again if I'm not in a lie flat seat. And the only way that's going to be possible is with points. So I'm going to start taking this really seriously. And so that's what it looked like for me in the beginning. And I think the beautiful thing about points is that it offers so many opportunities to so many different type of people. Like I said, I started out predominantly as a solo traveler. Now we have two kids where we take them on trips around school breaks, which are very, very high demand travel times. We're literally going to get on a plane next week, to take our kids on spring break. And points have kind of grown with me that entire time. They can be amazing for the solo traveler. They can be amazing for family travelers. They can be great if you really want to explore, if you're based in the US and you want to explore everything that our country has to offer in terms of amazing destinations. I love traveling internationally, and points have made that even easier and more possible for me. So I think that's one of the things that is just so powerful is that it's not, oh, you have to be one type of person to really get use out of this. I think there's so many fantastic ways to use points to enhance your travel experience.
Yeah, like my mom, for instance, she just recently, because she is a business owner herself, and the grind is like where she's always been, and she retired, and she's like, wow, I really want to go see the world. But I now, like, she sold her company. She made all this money and she's like, I don't want to spend that money. My mom's like the person who's like, no, no, no. Like, I don't want that. Like, that will go in investments or it'll just be there for when I die for you guys. Like, she's so like pragmatic about it all. And I'm like, but I want you to go see the world, mom. Like, come travel me, do the things. And so, like, this summer, we're having her join us for our trip. But I'm trying to explain to her, like, points. Use your points. Like you have credit cards. You've been using them. You've never taken advantage of this. So I will be sending her this tape and saying, "Mom, you have to watch this. Like it's critical for our trip."
Absolutely.
So someone like her who's like whether I mean it doesn't have to be someone who's just turning 60, but like somebody who's just starting out, whether 20s, 40s, 60s, no matter their age, what is like the basic fundamental that you would say, okay, this is where you start?
Yeah. And the thing is, I think where we start with anything is not even like what's the first thing you do or what's the first strategy. I think it all starts first with philosophy and your perspective. And that was a huge shift for me. And this is one of the things that I really try to offer to everyone, especially if they've never really heard about points travel before, or they think it's this very kind of unique, niche, weird thing, that only a few people do. Is I think this is what one of the reasons why I mentioned that how I found this hobby was truly through just traditional personal finance education, because I think that there are a lot of kind of corollaries between things that those of us who are really interested in personal finance that we learn about and we are totally willing to accept from a personal finance perspective. And how can we take those same ideas and bring them into a different area of our life? And what I mean by that is that, when I was first learning about personal finance, I was learning the basics of the basics. Like I said, what are retirement accounts? What does that even mean? What does it mean to, put money into a pre-tax account versus a post-tax account? What are these different vehicles that we have to enable us to have money work for us? And that to me was the theme of kind of all of my basic personal finance education is how can we take money that we've earned or money that we have left over after expenses and really have it go to work for us? I think a lot of us who are interested in personal finance, we probably don't keep all of our liquid or disposable assets in a savings account. Like we may have some money in a savings account, but we probably also have chosen other vehicles, for our assets. And there's a reason for that, right?
Yes.
Because they can do better things, more powerful things. They can compound when we use these other vehicles. And so I remember I'm learning about all of this just in terms of, like where do I put my money? Where do I prioritize things? And at the same time in my life, the very first year that I was working outside of training, I moved from Boston, which is where I'd done my training, to the Chicago area where I am now. My husband, who's also a physician, he was in his last year of medical training at the same time. So we basically had two households. We didn't have kids at the time, but he was living in Boston, where we had kind of been, for 4 years. I was in the Chicago area, and we had two of everything, right? Two apartments, two cars, twice the utilities, all these things. And so every time we were spending money, I started thinking about it almost as this corollary to, when we're earning money, we're not just leaving it all in a savings account. We are trying to do really strategic things with our money. And I was looking at what we were spending and our expenses. And I was thinking, as I'm learning about credit card points, I was thinking like, wow, this is the same. It's a mirror image. It's the same thing where expenses can also be leveraged. I think so many of us look at the money we're spending because we have to spend. We have to spend money to have a place to live, to have food to eat, on discretionary things that just bring us joy, in our life. But I was thinking, wow, so many of us look at expenses and all we see is, oh, this is just money going out the door. This is just kind of what you have to do to get the things in your life that you need or want. And when I learned about credit card points, it was like this light bulb went off for me because I was like, no, this is the same thing as why I'm putting money into a retirement account so that it can hopefully compound over time and be worth more than what I put in. My expenses, if I'm really smart about them, I can leverage these as well because I can spend my money and get what I want and need. And I can specifically use credit cards that give me points, give me miles. And those points and miles are another form of currency. And like I said, those can be leveraged for what I consider to be a significant amount of money's worth in travel. And so when I started looking at my expenses as, wait a minute, these can do so much more work for me than just giving me the things that I need and want. These can actually fuel and fund an extreme amount of travel. I was like, game on. Like, that's really when I feel like I did hit the ground running because I saw the potential so quickly. And I think from where I was doing this, again, it's just a personal hobby for a long time. I was looking around. I know a lot of other physicians, when you go through med school, you have no time, you have no life. You just end up only knowing most of the time the other people who were around you during that journey. So I had a lot of physician friends and colleagues, and I'm looking around at all of us. We're in our early 30s, or mid 30s. Everyone's kind of getting their life started, and we're all spending money. People were buying homes, people, who started having children. That's obviously an expense there. And I'm looking around at my community of people and I'm thinking, we are so perfectly poised to take such advantage of this hobby and no one knows about it because no one should know about it. No one talks to you about, oh, do you understand how amazing credit card points are, right? Like no one says that. I try to say that now, but no one was saying that in my community, 10 years ago. And at the same time, the practice that I was in, it was a small physician-owned private practice where there were four partner owners. I was not one of them, but we would have meetings. There was only about 7 or 8 physicians in the whole practice. It was very small, and we would have meetings about the practice. Kind of like monthly check-ins about, okay, what does our case volume look like? What does our revenue look like? What types of things? It was a pathology laboratory. What kind of things does the lab need in order to function? And it's expensive to run a medical practice. And I remember listening to the partners talk about different things, huge pieces of machinery for the laboratory and kind of having the conversation around, well, does it make more sense for us as a practice to just outright buy, this machinery and equipment? Does it make more sense to do it on like a lease basis? And all I'm hearing is just tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of expenses, like just racking up in my brain. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, these guys are sitting on a gold mine in terms of if they strategically had been using business credit cards for all of these practice expenses. Oh my gosh, my mind, it was breaking. I was like, you all would be traveling, nonstop, first class, or whatever your version is of amazing
Yeah.
travel. And it was, in my mind, all wasted, because they paid for all of our business expenses with just a bank card from a local credit union. And I'm sure they had their reasons for it, and that's wonderful. But from where I was sitting, I just started seeing the whole world through what money are you spending and what could those expenses be doing for you? And being in a community where a lot of my peers had personal expenses. I had a lot of peers who were thinking about starting up their own medical practices. My husband ultimately started his own medical practice, and all of these expenses to me just started looking like assets, like one after the other after the other. Like these are opportunities for us to leverage. And I think that was one of the biggest things that helped me kind of get over my own insecurity and fear about could I actually turn this thing that I love and that I feel like I have a lot of experience in into a business, was seeing the potential. I know there's so many people who could benefit from this, and also understanding no one's ever talked to them about it before. And like, I really want to close that gap. And that's really what created me taking the move from doing something that had just been a lovely, wonderful, fulfilling personal hobby, literally alone by myself, for 8 or 9 years, boring my husband to death, trying to talk about he had no interest in it, to actually saying, okay, I'm going to make a go of this and actually try to formally turn this into a business because I really feel like this is something that could benefit so many people.
So when was the year that you shifted and created Point Me to First Class?
Yeah. So I formally created Point Me to First Class. It was towards the end of 2021. And so again, like we'd come out of the pandemic, my kids were back in school. I was kind of at that point professionally where I felt like, okay, there are no amazing sort of medical opportunities for the subspecialty that I practice in the location I practice it. So, I'd kind of been keeping my ear to the ground. Do I want to get back into traditional medical practice? There's a lot of things I love, about medicine, and there were just no great opportunities. And so I was kind of at that point where it was like, okay, if I'm not going to jump straight back into medicine, like I said, I only know one other thing, and that's points. But I still wasn't even sure, like, what would this look like to teach people? And do people even want to learn about this? So the first thing I did was the very end of 2021 is when I started a Facebook group. It's called Point Me to First Class for women physicians, because women physicians as a community tend to really love to share information. They love to kind of coalesce, around certain ideas and certain topics. And I thought, okay, this to me feels like the least scary thing I could do. Let me just start a conversation, right? There was no offer, there was no paid product. It was just, this was kind of my proof of concept of, I know I love to talk about this. Again, I looked around at my community and thought, I really think other people could benefit from this, but I don't know if other people want to learn about it. So let me just test that theory to begin with, which is why I opened up, it's a free, Facebook group, like many other Facebook groups, just to kind of test, is anyone even interested? And I thought, wouldn't it be so great if like 5 or 10 other women wanted to come and talk about points with me? This would be amazing because I've never talked to anyone about points before. And I opened up the Facebook group the end of 2021 and it really took off. I think it really kind of hit on this aspect that was true for me, which is that I love to travel. And also, I don't want to spend $100,000 a year on travel. One, I can't, or if I was ever in a position where I could, I have so many other financial goals that I want to meet first before I'm going to put, my liquid cash there. So, what if we could have the best of both worlds, with points? And the group grew really kind of steadily. It grew organically, which was lovely because it meant that people were telling their friends about it. And it was about, 6 to 8 months later where I thought, okay, people are interested in talking about this. And also, I think this is where all kind of business ideas come from. You see a need and you think, wow, I could really help with that need, right? I could help someone learn something better, faster, easier. And I've gone through this now. I've seen so many people go through kind of a predictable process of where do people tend to get stuck? Where do they tend to have challenges? And if I can create something for someone that just helps move them through that whole process, like removing a lot of those challenges, helping them overcome them quicker, ultimately just to help people travel quicker and better using their points, then I thought, oh, I actually can see what that looks like in my head, which is when I created the course that I offer now called Points Made Easy. So I didn't start offering that until the very, very end of 2022. So now it's been about, a little over 2 years that I've actually had not only a business, but I really felt like, oh, here's a problem that I feel confident solving. And here's a thing that I want to offer people to help them solve it. So when I look back on it, it's funny now. I actually never said this on one of these types of conversations. I've talked about how I feel like my journey into points was pretty slow and cautious and deliberate,
Mhm.
but I've never really thought about, my journey into creating a business out of this was really the same way. I think there are some people who have a business idea and they're just fearless. They jump right in. They're like, I'm going to try 1,000 things. I don't care if all but one of them fail. It's learning. I'm going to keep moving. I think that is amazing. I am not like that. I am clearly like just a very slow, deliberate, organic kind of step taker in terms, I think, of everything. And that was true in the business as well. I don't feel like, oh, I jumped right in and was like, let me just go 1,000 miles an hour, and try to put out a million things and see what sticks. It was more like, let me just test, let me test and see if people want to talk about this. Okay, they want to talk about it. I see a lot of people are having the same problems. I think I could help them. I think I could fix that for them. Let me try to put something together that I think solves that problem and let me put it out there. And then let me grow that over time. And it's really been what feels to me like a wonderful process, but a much slower and deliberate process than like, let me just bust out of the gates, and try to like turn nothing into something overnight.
Awesome. So basically, I want to like kind of recap a little bit of what you've been talking about. So I would say like to start the journey, you talked about kind of shifting the mindset. Because I imagine, honestly, that if you asked the general public, if we did a survey, 100% of Americans, I could probably bet that over 80% of people, at least through their youth, feel the same way we both felt growing up. But even no matter how old you were, people just don't talk about credit. They don't talk about finances in any of your journey through your even up through college. They're just like, your parents should teach you that, maybe. And like a lot of people just don't really have that financial, I think, honestly, mentorship to like learn all the different pieces that you can have through, even investments. But so kind of not being so scared of what credit really is. And then once you can shift that mindset, looking at I already have to spend money. So how do I leverage my spending and truly do it? But I would say the part that, it took Chris and I a really long time. So one of the things we love to do, we became members for travel because we travel every other week for work. And so for us, we use our credit card points two basically, but specifically for lounges. And then because we like while we travel domestically, we'd like to have lounges if we have layovers. A lot where we live is a small city. So we don't get like a lot of direct flights, unfortunately. So for us, that is a really critical part. Plus, we work during our day as well. And then our hotel stays. We want to make sure that we're maximizing our hotel stays, even domestically, because we travel so often. But one of the things that we're struggling with is understanding how to utilize these same cards when we go international. So like we travel every single year internationally. And this year I was like, no, we met Devon and she talked about this and we are using points because we're actually traveling next month internationally, but we're going to be traveling with our daughter. So adding that extra person, costs more. And I think the one fundamental that we don't understand is how to pick a card and or choose when to allocate points and when to save the points. So those two pieces, if you could kind of touch on those, because for us, we're struggling and we're both pretty like bullheaded. So I'm like, no,
Yeah.
we need to do this. And he's like, but I don't know it. So I need to wait and figure it out. And I'm like, no, we're gonna listen to her, we're gonna listen to everybody.
Yes, I think these are such great questions. So let's start with kind of that, again, kind of basic. Where do we have an entry point in terms of where do we kind of get started? What should we be focusing on or prioritizing? And I think, again, because no one ever talks about this, what most people don't realize is that if you're based in the US or you have access to US issued credit cards, we have so many options. I mean, we have literally over 100 different credit cards that you could theoretically get approved for. And so, if you're someone who loves to travel and you want to start getting into this hobby where you want to be strategic about using the money you're spending to earn you points, ideally a lot of points and points you can then actually do something with, the place that I tell people to start is you have to understand kind of the points, the basic types of points that are available to you and start in the right spot. And here's what I mean by this. Most of the time when I work with folks, especially someone, who's in their let's say 30s or 40s, again, they have some established, financial history, credit history. And I say, okay, what credit card do you have right now? Very commonly, most people will have a credit card, one
Right.
or maybe two. And if you're a partnership, if you're a couple, oftentimes it's that one person signed up for a credit card and automatically made their partner the authorized user. I mean, these are the things that just make sense. It makes a lot of sense. And this is why I think so many of us kind of go through this, kind of growth phase. And most of the time, if someone has a credit card already, it will, I don't know why. For so many people, it tends to be an airline specific card. And I think it's because, for a lot of people, maybe they live next to one airport they tend to travel through the most, especially when they're leaving on flights. And if that airport tends to be a hub, at some point they thought, oh, this makes sense. If I get an airline specific credit card, then maybe I'll get free checked bags, or maybe I'll get priority boarding. That's amazing, right? We
I
all know
hear that
how
all the time.
yes, how horrible, honestly, like economy domestic travel has gotten in the last, like 5 to 7 years. So I understand that. So I meet so many people who have their Delta credit card because they live in Minneapolis or they live in Atlanta, or they
Mhm.
have their United credit card because they live, right outside of Denver or San Francisco. And then here's the problem. This is what so many people say to me is I have a points earning card. I use it for all my expenses. Basically anytime I have to put money on a credit card, I use, my one credit card. It's been years. And so I have, X hundred thousands of points. And when I've gone to try to use them, I feel like I don't get anything for them. Like I look up a flight and I could find a domestic flight from Portland to Miami that's going to wipe out all of these points, that I've saved for years and years. Like this doesn't seem to be worth it. And so this is where, again, understanding just a few basic things can be so powerful. And that is that for many, many people, the best, especially first credit card, is not going to be an airline credit card. And it's because of the way that it earns points and then what you can do with it. And so most airline credit cards, every time you put, let's say $100 of expenses on that card, you're going to earn 100 airline miles. So you're earning something, you're just not earning a lot. And I think it's better to focus on using a card that's going to actually allow you to earn points at a much faster rate. So instead of earning 100 points for every $100 you put on the card, what if you could earn 200 points or 300 or 400 points? So you can accelerate your points earning so much more quickly if you're using a different type of card. And then also, when it comes to what you can do with those points and miles, those of us who have airline credit cards or started out with those, you're very, very limited. You can only use those miles through that one specific airline. So let's say you've got a bunch of Delta miles. You could even have 700,000 of them and you think, man, I should be able to fly, like my extended family, to Rome for 700,000 miles. But you have very limited options because you can only book the flights that Delta says this is what we have available. So there could be 1,000 amazing flights on other airlines, but if Delta doesn't partner with them, it's not going to do you any good. And so what I like to tell people is first things first, make sure that you get one solid points earning card that earns what are called transferable points. And all that means is that you are not locked in. You're not locked into having a specific airline credit card or specific hotel credit card. And so examples of these, again, if you're based in the US, we have so many options, and I think that's a beautiful thing. Most people are familiar with banks like Chase or American Express or Capital One. All of these banks offer points earning credit cards that earn this type of point that I'm talking about, a transferable point. So a transferable point is a Chase Ultimate Rewards point or an American Express membership rewards points or a Capital One mile. And all that means is that when you've been earning all of them and you're ready to do something with it, you are not locked in to using those points or miles with one specific airline. That each one of those banks has an entire menu of anywhere between 10 and 20 options of you can take your Chase points and you can send them to Air France Airlines, for example, or you can send them to British Airways Airlines, for example, or United or Southwest. And so all of a sudden, when you're no longer limited to an airline credit card or hotel credit card, your options open up so much. And it's just that beginning point, I think, puts so many people on a better path. So if you're listening to this, go open up your wallet and look what's sitting in here right now. Like what is my one kind of go-to card? Because most of the people have that. Is it earning you any type of reward right now? A cashback reward, any type of points or miles? If it's earning you points or miles, I want you to actually look at that card. If it has the name of an airline on it or the name of a hotel on it, that's a good start, but that's probably not the most powerful card that you want to use moving forward. Okay. If you're someone, you pull out your wallet and you're like, holy cow, I have a Chase Sapphire Preferred card that's sitting in here. That's exactly the type of card that I'm talking about. It's a card that earns transferable points or miles. Those are going to be so much more powerful for you. So I think a very easy first step for people who are interested in kind of learning more about this and getting into this hobby is start again. You can start slow. You do not have to go out and do some wacky thing like apply for 5 credit cards in 1 month. I actually don't recommend that anyway, even if you do want to be really enthusiastic about this. But start with one really solid transferable points earning card, and that's going to set you up for a lot of success in the beginning.
Is there one in particular you're like, for the most basic person, like this is just what I would say, like it gives you maybe the most variety?
Yes, I have two favorites, and they're my two favorites because I think they offer really, really solid points earning in terms of the areas that most of us tend to spend money on a regular basis. We want to make sure that cards are offering us the ability to, like I said, earn a lot of points for those areas of spend. And then on the flip side, these are both transferable points earning cards. And so either one of them is going to give you a ton of options. So one of them is that card I just mentioned. Within the Chase family of credit cards, they have a personal credit card called the Chase Sapphire Preferred. I think that's an amazing kind of first credit card. It does have an annual fee, but it's not a premium level card. So it's not going to be a $500, $600 annual fee that I know for a lot of people in the beginning, that can be very off putting. The Chase Sapphire Preferred has a much more reasonable annual fee. It's got really solid points earning. And I think Chase points are so easy to use, especially for beginners. When you're first learning about how to actually move points from my Chase account to a hotel account or to an airline account, I think Chase is just such a great beginner place to start. The other favorite card I have, American Express, is just another kind of flavor, another version of transferable points earning cards. And I think American Express is also amazing for beginners. And they have one personal card. I think a lot of people are very familiar with the Amex Personal Platinum card. That's the one that maybe even not so much now, but certainly like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's like the first very heavy credit card made out of metal. I think it's one of those really flashy cards. I actually don't think that's a good card for most people. Don't get the platinum card, especially not as a beginner card if you don't already have it. But the American Express Personal Gold card, I think is a phenomenal kind of first entry level card. And the reason for that is talking about, again, these areas that a credit card will say, we're going to give you extra points when you put expenses of certain types on the card. The Amex Gold card gives you 4 points every time you spend $1 on groceries or dining out. And for so many of us,
Yeah.
dining out, groceries in general, that tends to be a pretty reliable recurring expense for us. So again, to basically be able to quadruple your points earning on that, I think is really powerful. And American Express also has some really, really great options in terms of their transfer partners, those airlines and hotels you can use their points through. So what happens for most people who get into this hobby is that over time and at a pace they're comfortable with, they usually do end up getting more than one credit card. And there's some really good reasons for that. But you can always start with one. And I think if you start with the Chase Sapphire Preferred, the Amex Personal Gold, I think those are both amazing options. And then you can build from there as you get more comfortable.
Well, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but I just recently heard, and because what you mentioned, the annual fees. And I know, like, to me, when I was like in my early 20s when I was started like getting multiple cards and just kind of starting this very, very small and just kind of looking for benefits. And one of the things I noticed, I was like, man, like this one's only, $90, but this one's $450.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that's like a big, big adjustment to try to take that on. But one of the things that I really recently heard was that people get scared of that, but a lot of times if you actually really research the cards, they build in credits for you that you can use that you really get that money back. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So you didn't ask this piece specifically, but I do think it's important to touch on that for folks who have businesses. If you're a business owner and you need credit cards for your business, I always tell people I'm not a financial or tax professional. I'm not an accountant. So please go and check with all of your accredited financial people. But if you have a business and you're using business credit cards for business expenses, oftentimes those annual fees can be considered a business expense. So that can be deductible. And so I like people who run businesses to kind of have that understanding up front that it's different on the personal side, right? So for a personal credit card that carries an annual fee, unfortunately, we're not legally allowed to write that off or say, oh, no, I don't have to pay this. You do have to pay it. But yes, oftentimes, there are different tiers of credit cards, even within one credit card issuer, where they'll give you a lot of different options. And oftentimes, the very high annual fee cards, they also come with more perks and more benefits. And so that can be in a couple of different ways. It can be either in what we call bonus categories, which are those areas where the credit card says, okay, for these designated expenses, we're going to allow you to earn a lot more points a lot quicker. So, a lot of the premium credit cards tend to have really lucrative bonus categories for your areas of spend. And then, in terms of perks and benefits, they can offer things like the lounge access that we're talking about at certain airports. They can give, like you said, outright credits. So, an example is the Chase Sapphire Reserve card. Every year that you hold that card, you automatically get $300 credit towards any travel expense. So the first $300 of the calendar year that you charge on that card that codes as travel, Chase just erases it. So for people, again, who love to travel, who are thinking, yeah, I easily spend, $300 a year at some point on some travel expense, that really should be factored into the effective annual fee. And I think one of the things that you mentioned that is so important is that I think we talk a lot in personal finance that personal finance is personal. Well, credit cards are personal too. What I may get out of one credit card may look very different than what you do just based on the fact that we live in different areas geographically, or what I'm looking for my card to do is different from you. So I think it is really, really smart anytime you're applying for a credit card, even if it has no annual fee, but certainly if it does, make sure that you understand what is everything I get with this credit card, not because I don't hold it as a rule that I need to take advantage of every single credit or benefit that a credit card may offer. But what I'm looking at is, okay, am I going to utilize enough of these credits or enough of these benefits that to me, it justifies the cost of the annual fee? And that answer may be yes, and it may be no, and it may change. So you may find a card for one time in your life, one phase of your life has an annual fee, and it's definitely worth it for you to carry that card. And then because you move locations or because you start a family or because your family structure changes or whatever the reason may be, if you're no longer getting the same use out of a card year after year after year, that's totally fine. You can always change that card out. You can cancel that card. So none of these things are permanent. But I do think it's a very smart move whenever you're thinking of getting a new card to really look at what does this card offer and what does it offer me personally? The way I travel or my priorities, can I take enough advantage of this card to justify that annual fee? Because that can be a little bit of, I think, an obstacle for people, especially in the beginning, if they're used to only carrying some of those entry level cards that are fee free, which can also be amazing. But the fee free cards, they're never going to offer the same exact things that the annual fee cards are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, talking about people getting into this, what are maybe two of the top mistakes that you see when people are trying to like learn about this that you would say, like, please avoid these?
Yes. So we've kind of touched on one already, but I think it bears repeating, which is it really matters what kind of card you have. I see so many people who are like, I have a points card. It's an Amazon card. And I'm like, okay. I mean, technically, yes. And trust me, I spend enough on Amazon. I get why people have an Amazon card, but Amazon cards do not earn the type of points that you can then use to book travel. So I think the number one kind of common mistake is just not understanding, because no one's ever taught you this before, just the difference in types of cards, especially rewards cards, and what they offer you. So again, really coming and honing in on, I'd like to find one solid card that earns transferable credit card points. That, instead of putting all of your spend on a store specific card, like a Macy's card or a Nordstrom card or an airline or hotel specific card, that is, I think, for so many people, the most common. I don't even want to call it mistake, because it's not like none of us knew what we were doing to begin with, but I think that that's like the best first place to redirect and focus, is to make sure that you have one solid transferable points earning card. And then I'm going to go to the other side of the equation, which is for people who already have at least one of those cards that earns Chase points or City points or Capital One or American Express. This is the thing that it doesn't even need to make complete sense to you right now. I just want you to tuck this away, like in the back of your brain, because I promise you this will have an enormous impact at some point if you are going to get into the points and miles hobby, which is that your credit card company, so again, the same ones I've been talking about, Chase or American Express, they do not tell you how valuable your points are. And I just want to give you like a quick example of this. If you're someone who has been walking around with their one Amex card or their one Chase card, it is so common. You log onto your account and they'll show you this big, beautiful number. You have 100,000 points, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, that's so great. I have all these points. But if you look at your actual credit card account, it will tell you you actually have a lot of options for how you can turn those points in. So they'll say, hey, you can trade in your points for something like a gift card. You can trade in your points for a statement credit. You can trade in your points. This is where most people are familiar if they do want to use their points for travel. They say, hey, you can trade in your points if you book a flight or a hotel stay or a rental car through your credit card account. And so that's kind of the realm of what most people are familiar with in terms of using points. And the reason why I think it's a mistake, not so much a mistake to do any of those, it's a mistake to believe your credit card company that those are the only things that you can do with them. Because what your credit card company does not give you any flashing kind of warnings about, but is actually the way that I have, I mean, literally sometimes like 10x'd the value that I get out of my points, is by taking those points and literally, you do this digitally. It's not a physical thing. You digitally move them out of your credit card account and again into an airline frequent flyer account or hotel loyalty account that your credit card company says, hey, here are your, 10 to 20 options. Just moving your points out of your credit card account and into an airline or hotel account. That is what allows you to get massive value out of your points. And so again, without even going into like the granular details of that, I just want people to hear that, oh, wait a minute, I've been earning credit card points and I've only ever used them to book travel through my credit card account. I promise you, your points can be worth 2 to 10 times more if you just stop doing that. So whether that's for your next trip or a trip 2 years down the line, I just want to plant that seed that is a lie that your credit card company is telling you that that's the best way to use your points, because it's not.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm guilty of doing that
Me
for last
too. How
year.
do you think I know
And
about
then
this?
during your talk earlier this year that I was watching, I said, "Oh my gosh, I need to investigate the situation." So Chris and I have been
Yes.
actively looking at it because we're staying in Europe for, I think it's almost 5 weeks. So we are going to
Yes.
be nomadic and we want to
How
find
amazing.
deals. So
Yeah,
we want to enjoy everything and we're used to and domestically when we travel. We like getting sweets. We like doing like the higher
I
things. We
agree.
travel so often, but
Yeah.
it's harder internationally. So we
Yeah.
want to utilize those points that we have. So thank you for your advice. We're actually
Yes.
actively using it
Yes. And I want
this
to give
time
just one
around.
example, because again, I think it can be hard to kind of make sense of this stuff, if you don't hear real life examples. And the reason I bring up that second mistake is I honestly believe it's a rite of passage. I think anyone who ever has had credit card points and wants to get serious about using them, it's almost like you don't even have the opportunity to get serious about them until you've used your points through your credit card account and then realize kind of what happened. And that was true for me. So like I said, the very first credit card I ever got in my own name, I was 31 years old. Okay. And it was the last year of my medical training. I got a Chase Sapphire Preferred card and didn't know anything about points. This is before I learned anything about it. I was still mostly paying cash, or using, debit cards for a lot of my transactions. And so my husband and I had like barely been using, this credit card on and off for literally 3 years. And by 2014, we had accrued about 250,000 points on this card. Because again, it was the only card we would use if I would even use, a card for expenses. And I knew nothing really at this point about credit cards. And I remember my husband and I, we were planning a trip to go to Morocco. And we were sitting on the couch one night and he looked at me and he goes, "This is so great." He's like, we had Chase points. He said, "We can use all 250,000 of these Chase points and we can book round trip economy flights to Morocco and we don't have to pay anything. Like we can turn in all 250,000 of these points to save on what is effectively $2,500 of round trip economy flights." And in that moment, I was like, "You're a genius. We are the smartest people ever. We're going to save $2,500 on economy flights." I mean, this was a huge deal to me, right? And I'm not trying to be, like facetious or whatever. I mean, that's a lot of money, especially when, that phase of our life, we'd never spent $2,500, on flights before. And I just thought, this is magical and amazing, right? And we had a wonderful time. We flew economy. Of course, we didn't take any pictures of the plane because who cares about taking pictures, of like an economy seat on an overnight flight. We had a wonderful trip, but it was really around the time we came back from that trip that I started learning about points. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, this is the difference, is that you can use 250,000 Chase points to offset the cost of a $2,500, flight, which again, I think is amazing compared to zero, right? I'd rather save $2,500 than zero anytime. But just to give you a point of comparison, you and I are recording this episode. I'm not going to say like what day of the year, but in 1 week, my family of now four, we're going to Paris for my kids' spring break. There's four of us. My kids are 9 and 6. We're flying round trip business class on Air France. So direct flight, lie flat seats. My kids can actually sleep on those overnight. So 4 round trip business class tickets I booked for less than 200,000 Chase points total.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's the difference. Like, that's what I learned. Like,
Yeah.
wow, I could actually spend fewer points booking more people on business class than what my credit card company told me I could do to fly 2 people round trip economy class. Like, the difference is that significant. And I think that's why this had made such a huge impact in my life and the lives
Powerful.
of people that, I talk to about this, because that is not insignificant. And I think that's the thing, that so many of us who've dabbled in points, especially again, if you've looked to use your airline miles for domestic flights, I can understand that experience of, I have so many points and it doesn't seem like they do anything. This doesn't really seem worth it. I promise you, the opportunities that exist are so wildly better than probably anything that you've learned about so far. And I think that difference is huge. So again, if you've ever used your points, or even if you haven't and you have transferable points, please just remember that if you're going to book travel, don't book travel straight through your credit card account, because that is where your credit card company is going to benefit from getting all your points, and you're not going to benefit from getting some of these amazing deals that are out there.
Absolutely. What good advice. Well, I know that I've taken up a bunch of your time, so I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
I would like to know what is like the biggest lesson that you've learned over, I guess now probably 10 years of doing this, maybe a little bit longer on your own before, and it could be whether it was personal or within your business, but what is like the biggest lesson of, taking your credit card benefits and points and really utilizing them to better your life?
Yeah, this, like I said, this has been true for me. This has been true for so many people that I've worked with, is that I think credit card points are something on the surface. They sound kind of silly. Like, okay, we've got a lot going on in our worlds right now. We have a lot of things that are very serious, and credit card points are just kind of frivolous and silly. But I have to tell you, I mean, I really feel like they've so fundamentally changed the way I experience travel, the opportunities that I now have available to give to my children that I never had growing up. I've seen the way that they've changed other people's lives and what they're able to do, for themselves and for their loved ones. And I think it's just for anybody who's either already written off points because they don't think they're that valuable, or if you're someone who's never even really been exposed to this whole world before and you're just learning about it for the first time, it really is just that if you are someone who loves to travel, points can be so powerful and can just fundamentally change your entire travel experience. And I think that, that really is not to be understated, because I think travel is so much more than just what plane or what seat do you sit on to get from point A to point B. I think travel can be one of the most transformative, profound experiences of our lives. And so to be able to have just more access to that, or access to a broader range of experiences within that, I personally think is priceless. So I just want to invite people who have any interest at all in this hobby to just explore it. I think, and really, I think your mind is going to be blown about what's available.
Amazing. No, thank you so much. Could you tell our listeners where they, if they, if they really want to get serious about this, where they could connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my business is called Point Me to First Class. You can find me online at pointmetofirstclass.com is my website. I run a podcast also called Point Me to First Class. So if you just want a way where you want to start just learning about this, in a step-by-step fashion, you can tune into the podcast. There's over 100 episodes now. And so, I cover all sorts of different topics in the points and miles world. And then for people who know that they're ready to take the next step and really want to get serious about this hobby and don't want to take the 3 or 4 years that it took me to learn how to do this kind of step by step, I also offer a course called Points Made Easy, where I am in there hands on and I'm teaching you kind of everything you need to know to get the most out of points and how to make it work for you, because I don't have a one size kind of fits all perspective when it comes to points. We really figure out what are your goals, what are your priorities, and how can we set you up for point success. So those are a couple of different ways that people can find me if they're interested.
Oh, that's perfect. I'll be taking advantage of that. And I'm definitely going to start listening to your podcast. I'm really
Please
excited
do.
about that. Yeah. I really appreciate your time today. I know that our listeners got a ton of valuable value from this. I know that I did. So I'm very grateful. And it was nice to meet you in person and nice to see you again.
Same. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for allowing me to talk about one of my favorite subjects on earth. And I just appreciate the invitation so much. Thank you for having me here today.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into this episode. We truly appreciate your support. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share the podcast with your friends. Until next time.